Hey guys, it's Josh here and welcome to my basic tutorial on how to create a simple modern table for The Sims 4. My hope is that you'll be able to watch this and understand the basics of how to make custom content for The Sims 4 and be able to start making your own objects. But before we get started, you'll need 3 programs. You'll need Sims 4 Studio, Blender version 2.70, and finally you'll also need some kind of photo editing tool. I'll leave links to the programs I use in the description below. Anyway, let's jump right in. So to get started, we'll first need to create the package file for the piece of custom content itself. So what we do is create a new 3D mesh, select object, and then actually scroll around or just even search for a table. Since we are working on a table, depending on what you want to create, you'll have to pick something similar as your starting point. So if you wanted to make a toilet, you'd search up toilet and start off with that. Anyway, I'll be using the mega dining table as the starting base, so select that, hit next, and then just call it whatever you like. I just call it 1 usually, I don't know why, but that's what I do. And once that's been created, you should be welcomed on this screen right here. And when you do, just forget everything and go to meshes and export the mesh and call it whatever you like. I'll just call this one table. And once that has been exported, you are good to open Blender. Once the mesh has been exported and you've opened it up in Blender, it should look something like this, and the first thing you'd want to do is right click on the table, hit Shift D, escape, and what that basically does is it just duplicates the table so that you can work with a new table while using the original table as the kind of like measuring tool, so that you don't make the table too tall, too short, or too big or anything like that, because obviously we don't want anything like that to happen. So once that's been done, go to the original table mesh, which if you're following along with the mega table, it should be Studio Mesh 1. Then either go down here and go into edit mode like so, or simply just press tab and then hit A, then X, and then delete. Which then you'll be able to completely delete every single polygon and vertex on the table so that you can basically start fresh. So once that's done, we can start making the table. So to begin with, we're obviously going to want to add a shape to the mesh itself. So we can do that by hitting Shift A and then selecting cube. And then once that's done, go into face select mode and begin moving the sides and the top and bottom of the table until they're essentially in line with the original table, so that we are not going to have floating plates or plates that are inside the table or sims that are like going to be sitting inside the table. Because if we left it as it is right now, maybe not like this, but if we like kind of made a table that was like this big, then obviously when sims sat at the table, they'll literally be sitting in the table, which is not optimal. So basically just adjust the table sides until they're somewhat in line. Like you could obviously make it a little bit longer or shorter than usual, but not by too much, or else you'll have to start adjusting slots, and that's not really what this tutorial will be about. So that's looking pretty good. Obviously, since this is a basic tutorial, I'm not using like modifiers or anything like that, like mirrors, and that's a bit too like complicated for me to explain either way. But anyway, now that the main surface is done, we can actually just delete the original table now, since we've got what we wanted and we've basically measured out the table already. Now that the basic shape of the tabletop is now complete, we can start working on the legs now. And if you remember from the start of this video, the legs were a big square that had a hole through it. So to do that, we just have to add another cube, and it seems like that this cube did not appear where we want it to. So to get it perfectly in the center again, we just go into these transform values and change them to 0. If this panel is not visible for you, you can press N and it toggles it on and off. And once that's done, just like the tabletop, we can start adjusting the faces of the object itself. And if you press the numpad 1 and 3, and some of the other ones as well, it actually enables your orthogonal view so that you can make really precise measurements and make sure things are lined up properly. So basically this red line will be the floor in the game and in this scene as well. So just basically line it up to the floor and you're basically good. And then just like last time, we're just moving all these sides back and forth until they're pretty much in line. I usually am a lot more precise, but this is a really basic tutorial, so I won't go into that much detail. But as you can see, you can just use these like faint lines as some kind of like measurement device. And then, yep, that's looking pretty good. I'm liking how that's turning out, so we can just raise this a little bit more. I will have some sort of like rack for this to sit on, but I don't want it to be touching like that, so I'll be leaving it a little bit below. And to basically do this inside section, what you do is you select the face, but instead of moving it, you press X and then delete faces. So delete both sides like so. Once the two faces have been deleted, simply select the entire square by just hovering over one side of it and hit L. And then once that's been completed, just hit Shift D to duplicate and then press SX to start scaling the shape on the X-axis. And then after that, hit S and Z to scale it on the Z-axis. So then once that's done, once again, we want to select the smaller square inside by just zooming in, hovering over the face and hitting L. And what we want to do to this is flip the faces so that they're facing inwards rather than outwards. So we do that by just hitting W, flip normals. So as you can see now, we're starting to get there, and both side facing sides are now basically complete. And now we need to create the front and backwards facing sides, and we do that by holding Shift and selecting, well, first off we have to go into edge select mode, which is next to the face select mode, and then just hold Shift and select one edge on either side. So we just select one edge on this side on both boxes. And then once that's been complete, we just hit Control E, edge loop. So now that selects a loop around the edges of the shape. Then we want to hit Control E, then bridge edge loops. And then what that does, it just basically fills in the holes, and now the leg is basically finished. So we want to create the little rack as well. So now that the rack has been done, I did skip over putting the rack down since it's basically more of the same, just creating a square, or creating a cube rather, and then just scaling it around and shifting the faces. And in this case, I put it on one side, I duplicated it and just dragged it over to the other side. So that's basically what happened. And for this table, I might make these corners a little bit softer. So what we can do that just by selecting each edge, just by holding Shift in edge select mode and right clicking on each edge, then click Control E and then going to bevel. And then once that's been selected, simply drag. You'll see that there's a black line on the screen that's like going from the center, and to actually start the edge bevel, just go away from the center of the screen and it should start a bevel and make it could be really small, doesn't really matter. And that's looking pretty good, and it'll just help make the corners look a little bit softer. And it's not too intensive in terms of like polygons and stuff, since it's only going to be adding at most 8 polygons, since we'll just have to split it into a triangle. So 2, 4, 6, 8, that's not too bad. So once that's basically all done, we are now ready to start unwrapping the mesh itself. So it's a little bit tricky sometimes, but for the most part, what you do is you go back into face select mode and select individual faces by holding Shift and then hitting E, putting your mouse into this area right here and hit E. And what that does is it basically starts unwrapping for you. And the good idea is to turn on this keep UV and edit mode mesh selection in sync, so you can actually use this to select faces as well, just so you can see like when you have something here selected, you know what you're looking at. So what you can do now is when you select them in here, you can just hold G and move it around like this. But we want to make sure that we want to save space, so what we can do is do the same for this side as well. Hit E and you'll find that since it's essentially the exact same, it will line up perfectly. And once that's done, hit B, drag your mouse over the entire square and then G, and then you can just drag it away, since we don't want to have it all muddled up. We'll do the sorting a bit later. So we're just going to shrink it down a little bit as well with the scale key, so S, and you can shrink it down. And then once that's done, we'll just start unwrapping different areas as well. So we'll unwrap the outside of the square first. Well, I won't do the bottom since the bottom will be done separately, but we'll do the top side and the 2 left and right facing sides, and we can just do that by hitting E once again, dragging it away. We'll do the inside as well. We won't select the top face just yet. Drag it down. Since this is a little bit smaller, I will shrink it down a little bit more. And then I'll do the top as well. So top and bottom, it really doesn't matter. The bottom one I'll make really small since it literally does not matter. But for this top one, I'll make it just a little bit smaller, but not too small. Since I think there'll be a little bit of texture that will be visible, so we'll keep it. And then for this one, so it's a lot easier to select faces when there's a big thing like this over the top. You can turn on limit selection to visible, and then you can actually, you get like x-ray vision essentially, and we want to delete the top and bottom faces of the rack. So we can do that by just selecting these by holding shift, and then basically, I'll actually turn on solid mode as well. A solid mode makes it a little bit easier, especially when you're working with CC, since so when you start unwrapping, the texture will start overlaying on the mesh and it'll get a little bit messy looking. So just turn on solid mode so it's a consistent color, and it makes the shading a little bit easier to see as well. But once that's done, we can select X and delete faces, which will just make it a lot easier in the long run. And once that's done, simply select both, just start unwrapping basically. And just shrinking it down a little bit. Actually, these are essentially the same thing, so I will just unwrap them individually and they'll just share the same texture. And then same for, well, actually not the same for these 2 faces. So the outwards facing faces can be unwrapped at the same time, and the inwards facing faces can be unwrapped at the same time as well. And since this is a lot smaller, or this is going to be a lot less likely to be visible, I will shrink this down a lot. And then the bottom of the table, that will be not that visible either, so I'll make that smaller. The top of the table, it's going to be a solid color, so this could actually be a little bit smaller as well. You can rotate by pressing R, and then for the sides, we'll just simply do a loop around. And you'll notice that if we press E, it's a little bit long, and it's actually a little bit hard to see. So what we want to do is actually go back into here, press U, use light map pack, and then you should have selected the faces like on here, so you should have one like selected already like this, and you'll know that if there's like a face selected individually, if there's like a white texture instead of a yellow texture. And once that's done, hit U, follow active quads, and then that makes it a little bit bigger and it's a little bit easier to work with. And then just hit S, X, and then just bring it down a little bit, and I think that's everything done. Now that the object has been unwrapped, we have to start putting things together onto this square and make things fit nicely. So this will be using a lot of scaling, so we'll just start scaling the sides. This is the square around the edge, so this will be fine in the corner. Usually I try to make sure that like individual shapes have their own little area so that I can know it's a lot easier for me to texture them. So the tabletops will go next to each other, so tabletop 1, tabletop 2. Since this is a bottom facing one, I'll make that small. And this is literally a bottom, this is like this is gonna be like literally miniature since it doesn't really matter, because that's the bottom of the entire table. What is this? So that is the outwards facing sides of the rack, or that little stand. So we'll just scale this down a little bit, probably really small to be honest. And then I think this is the inwards facing one, so this could go right next to it and be even smaller. What is this? This is the outside of the leg. We can rotate it by holding R, or by pressing R rather, making it small enough to fit, scaling it a little bit, and then essentially more of the same for everything else. Alright, so now that everything has been unwrapped fairly neatly, I will say this now, I'm not like a pro at unwrapping. It's not really my favorite thing to do, but I will point out that your unwrapping may look different. That is fine. Unwrapping honestly is not as like specific as actually creating the mesh itself. Like you could shrink this down, move it over here, and it should essentially still look the same, as long as like if you make it like too small, obviously the texture will look really fuzzy. But like say if I like kept it the same size and I like move stuff around. It should turn out the same. As long as they're not overlapping, you should be good to continue. But anyway, once that's all done, we just want to make sure that everything is unwrapped, and if there's no black, usually if you have something unwrapped, there will be something that's not unwrapped, there will be a black dot in the corner right here, and if there doesn't seem to be one right here, so we're good to go. So we should get out of edit mode now, and then just add, so select the wrench icon here, go to add modifier and go to edge split, and just hit apply. What this basically does is it splits the edges of the table so that it's like, in The Sims, if you don't have the edges split, like especially if you're making a table and you don't split the edges on the, like if you don't split the table top from the sides of the table, like it does this weird shadow thing where like the corner of the table would have really dark, it will have really dark corners basically, but the edge split basically stops that from happening. And what we want to do also is we don't want an edge split right here. So on these corners, this is probably the only spot on this table where we do not want an edge split. So we can actually undo that by going to the UV area and selecting the entire edge area, which depending on how you unwrapped will be somewhere hopefully in a line like this, which will make it a lot easier to texture later on, but it should be easy to select either way. And then just hit W, remove doubles, and then that basically makes it so that it will be a smooth surface when in the Sims at least, in the game. Once that's done, make sure we save. I don't think I've saved yet. Oh my goodness, that would have been a bad thing if I crashed, but we've saved now, so we're actually ready to put this into Sims 4 Studio to see how it looks. So we'll open up the table once again and actually import the mesh this time. And table. As you can see, this is how it's looking. It's looking pretty cool. Like obviously the textures have not been finished yet, so it actually looks really weird to be honest, but we can see the shape is all there. And but one thing we haven't done yet are the shadows, so we'll work on that right now. So for these shadows, you'll probably want to turn on texture mode again, which can be changed from here. So from solid to texture. We actually do not need these little dots, these little square ones, so we just go into that. Actually, first off, we want to see the shadows as well, don't we? So we just hit A until everything's selected, go into this icon right here, and select diffuse. And this should open up the shadow texture that The Sims uses. So we want to delete these little square ones. So all of the little square ones exist here, so we can just delete those by deleting the faces. And for this one is just basically manipulating. So we can do that by actually shrinking this down a little bit from here, shrinking the UV down a little bit, and then just going into the viewport area and then scaling this a little bit as well. So we want to scale this in the X a little bit, and then I think that's pretty good. So we'll just save that and we're good to go back and just make sure the shadow is pretty good. Like, yeah, that shadow is pretty decent now. So once that's done, we can start texturing. So actually, no, before that, we'll just import the meshes for the other ones as well. So usually I don't worry about the number of vertices, and I don't worry about level of detail too much, unless it's like a really, really big texture. Like if you look right now, it's honestly, my mesh has less polygons than the low version of the original table. So that's pretty much shows you that I don't really need to worry about it too much. And for the shadows, what we basically want to do is actually go back to here, save this, then go to File, Save As, Shadow. And then what we want to do is delete the actual shadow texture, which is right here. Go into Studio Mesh 1, select this right here, Type of Data, Scene, go to Cut and make that 0, and then save. Then just make sure you open, well, actually, honestly, don't worry about that. And then after you save it, go into Sims 4 Studio, and then start importing the shadow. And what the shadow basically is when you put your object outside, it uses this object to render the shadow in the game instead of the object itself for whatever reason. I have no idea why they do that, but that's how they do it. So every time you make a mesh, usually you have to make a shadow mesh as well, which isn't too hard. You honestly just copy and paste. So now that's done, we want to start making the textures. So we just go back into edit mode of the table. Actually, we'll just go back into the original table itself instead of the shadow, and then just open up the edit mode for the table, and then just go to image, new image, And we'll make the texture maybe just half of 1024, 512. We don't want to make the texture too big because obviously that will have some performance issues on lower tier computers, but honestly The Sims is a pretty like performance friendly game, so it shouldn't really matter too much, but it's always nice to make a texture as small as you can without losing too much quality. So once you've done that, we want to just export the UVs by pressing A on everything until everything is highlighted. Press UVs and export UV layout, and then just save that as a UV texture or something. And then we will open up GIMP. So once you've opened up your photo editor, you just simply open up your UV map and then just color it in like a kid's color book. And this is how it turned out. I wanted to have a white surface tabletop with a slightly darker gray leg with the simple, I guess, racks or the little stands being a dark gray color, and you just simply export that without the UV obviously. So you just export that and you can open it up and import the texture itself. And as you can see, it's kind of come together okay, but you'll notice like, hey, where are the shadows? Why is it like so blinding? And yes, that is correct. If you like put this in the game as it is, it will look really, really strange. So what we're gonna do now is actually like make the shadows darker in certain areas so that it looks like how it should in real life without it being like fully single solid color. So what we do is go back into Blender, and then what we want to do is select everything and actually go into this camera icon, and it should be by default ready to be clicked. So just go down to bake and then bake the ambient occlusion. So basically what that did was it created a texture of the table using the UV that like kind of has better shading, like ambient occlusion. So once it's complete, it shouldn't take that long. You just save as, and I usually just save it as AO because AO, ambient occlusion. And then you can actually go back to your texture and open up the ambient, add the ambient occlusion as a layer. And then simply go into colors, brightness and contrast, and basically increase the contrast until the lightest part of your object is basically displayed as white. So this is the tabletop right here. So we just want to keep adjusting this until it's white fully. So usually for me, it's just making everything 100. And as you can see, that's pretty bright. I might actually lower it just a little bit like so. And once that's done, you actually go into the mode. So Photoshop has this and GIMP has this. I'm not sure if I'm sure other photo editing tools have it as well, but I'm not sure which ones. But if you use GIMP or Photoshop, there will be, I know that there will be a mode up here somewhere on your layers tab, and you can just go to mode and then multiply. And that basically multiplies the ambient occlusion map over top of your solid color map, and it will keep the colors as well. This will work with like other textures as well. So you can literally use like wooden textures, like metal textures, and it will just simply overlay the shading over top of it and it'll look pretty fine. So once that's done, we can go back into this table and see honestly how much better it will look. As you can see, the ambient occlusion map has made this table look a lot better, and what I actually might do is go in and shade in, like it'll darken this area a bit. Like the ambient occlusion didn't do that for this table since obviously there was like almost nothing in the way for it, but I would just lower it just so that there's a little bit of contrast at least between the top of the table and the side. So we'll just re-import the texture. Yeah, that's a little bit better, and the game will deal with the rest basically. So once that's done, we should do one more thing, which is to go into the warehouse tab and then go to these two things. So there's almost always a bump map texture and a reflection texture. This is a really basic tutorial, so I won't really go into much detail, but for this tutorial, just replace it with blank copies of itself. So what you would do is you'd export the bump map texture and go to a spot where there's no bump, and then just copy that and then just paste it over the entire image. Or you can just literally just crop the entire image to be the size. So same with this. This one is literally just a blank image, so just import a completely blank image and it will be fine. And then obviously if you want to make more swatches, you just start recoloring, and obviously I won't be sharing this online, so I won't worry about it too much, but you'd obviously also like the rigs look good, the tags, this is not light brown, this is white, and gray maybe, where is gray? Yeah, so that's basically all there is to it. We'll just jump in game now to see how it looks. We are in the game now, and Supriya seems to be having a pretty good time sitting at her new table, and at a quick glance it does appear to be somewhat decent. Like, I usually put a little bit more time into custom content, but if you do the same, I'm sure you'll be able to achieve even better results than this table. But anyway, I hope you were able to find this table, or oh my goodness, I hope you were able to find this tutorial somewhat helpful in your goal to create custom content for The Sims 4. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye guys!